Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversations resume this evening with Anne Leslie, the journalist, Laurie Taylor, Professor of Sociology at York University, Benny Green, the versatilitist, and Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University. And this time we have music from Jeremy Nicholas. It is, of course, indefensible to talk about your holidays. I say indefensible unless it's a tale of woe. It was all right my East Molesey chum letting me know about how he'd forgotten the Spanish word for chicken in a restaurant in Andalusia and was reduced to giving an imitation of the bird, standing on one leg and rubbing the toe of his other shoe up and down it while working his elbows and making croaking noises. Naturally, the waiter brought him a bottle of TCP for his throat and a napkin full of ice to bring his temperature down. And it was certainly okay for my friend Kev, who'd been holidaying in Africa in a place he kept on calling Musaka, to report that in a country full of roadblocks set up as far as he could see so that visitors could contribute their mite to the pension funds of the soldiery, he'd come upon a notice which read, "Roadblock ahead, sponsored by Barter Shoes." Well, I think it's all right telling people this because it's a tale of, well, these are tales, little tales of woe, rather than one of those blissful accounts you get in Hillary's Good Hotel Guide where people talk of their holidays in Penzance as though they'd died and gone to heaven. Otherwise, of course, talking about holidays is, as I say, perfectly indefensible. It's not going to stop you, though, is it? Right?
No, you've got to decide whether or not, really, that the holiday... are you talking about holidays that really are tales of woe, or just simply translating all holidays into tales of woe?
That's a rhetorical question.
Well, yes, it was. I was aware.
Tales of woe.
Well, they can be turned, but I was aware this year of the Chernobyl factor. But did you notice that people were coming back and talking about the effect of Chernobyl on Europe? And I realised suddenly that this had been placed into my lap, and I had a better tale of woe to tell than anybody, because I'd taken holidays on Lake Lugano, and 3 weeks after I returned, I heard that, in fact, the lake was so radioactive that it had been banned. The fish were no longer edible from it, and a ruling had gone out. And I suddenly realised that all the stories of happily romping in the lake were now translated immediately into a tale of woe in which I'd been gaily splashing strontium-90 into my beloved's face.
That's why your hair is
glowing. Have I got it right that you think it's only all right to tell tales of woe,
yes,
but not the blissful sort?
It just seemed to me that it is possible by a little sleight of hand to translate all holidays into failed holidays. They're always on the edge of failure.
But you feel obliged to do that. Yeah, well, that's interesting.
No, I think that's pandering to fashionable pessimism. Somehow to pretend it's all dreadful, I think, is not fair on the young. Perhaps it's not even fair on the middle-aged. And I had a splendid holiday. I'm afraid I have to tell you that, or however envious making it is, but I'm embarrassed to say that everything that happened to me and everything I remember from it is totally the same as every other traveller. I mean, it was South America, and I could just give you a string of cliches about South America and about us, but I won't. But it seems to me those are the real traveller stories, because it's quite false to go to a country and expect to find something really different. Why on earth should you?
True enough.
You know, there's a certain type of person who are about to tell you about their holiday. You know that they're talking entirely in code. For example, if somebody said, "We've had an absolutely fascinating holiday." Fascinating is code, but thank God we don't live there. And it usually applies to Colombia or Russia or China. And there are other code words too, like there's a certain type of person, and I'll call them Caroline and Nigel because I know an awful lot of them and none of them are called Caroline and Nigel, who they go to places that they think they shouldn't go to, like Mallorca, for example, because Mallorca, as we know, is, and this is one of their favourite code words, ruined, except the bit that they're in. Mallorca is not ruined around Dea because of Robert Graves, though, mind you, I think now that he's died, it's becoming ruined. Malta, of course, was ruined years and years and years ago, but Gozo is not ruined, so they never say we went to Malta, they'll say we went to Gozo, which is, after all, it's still part of the country.
It's a silly name, though, isn't it?
Nobody will say Costa, for example, anymore, because that implies the 18 to 30 club with everybody being sick. So they'll say Andalusia or Catalonia, and they'll always talk about a little place tucked up into the hills. And those sort of people, they never go anywhere flat because there's nowhere to have little places tucked up into the hills. And they, of course, write for Hillary's book because it's always, the Pension Clotilde is tucked up into the hills behind whatever, some unfashionable place like Benidorm.
From Benidorm to Benny
It
Green.
depends very the happiness. Oh my goodness!
I do apologise.
Thank you. I accept it.
Sorry about that.
The degree of happiness of a holiday depends on the degree of decrepitude at a home you've left. After all, if you struggle for years and years to have a home with more than one room in it, and a holiday in the end means you save up enough money to go away and all live in one room for 2 weeks, or 2 rooms if you're lucky. If a family goes away on a holiday and shares, 2 or 3 rooms, there is no privacy, no space, and if you've been used to having a room of your own, it's very difficult.
You were going to quote Milton.
I was going to quote Milton, who always talked about the fact that when you were on holiday, your standard of living declined in every possible way.
Absolutely.
And but I was just talking about the way in which people are describing their holidays this year. It does seem to me that there has been a dramatic change around, because it's as though everybody knows that they're going to be bored by stories of holidays, so people are doing their best to make the stories better, and you can almost detect some aesthetic rehearsal going on. So that when you say to people nowadays, "What was the weather like?" they suddenly say something like, "There was this odd clarity of light. Have you seen any Lorca recently?" Something like that.
I don't believe
No,
it.
and postcards.
Well,
postcards. I had a postcard this year, and I quote. Now, it seems to me this postcard, splendid postcard, came from somebody called Sally. Splendid postcard, but it's an art form. It said simply, Minorca it was from. It's all varicose legs, Spanish caesarean scars, Italians trying to sit on your lap, and women with excruciating sunburn trying to drown their offspring. Sangria only makes you angrier.
Sorry, can't use this. Editor, punch.
I wonder how long that took to write.
Yeah.
But it seems to me one of the great things you can give up on holidays is expecting to find something really different from England. Because on the whole, the world is very much the same. I've seen the Alps and they remind me of the Derbyshire Peak District. I've been to the Russian steppes. They look just like Lincolnshire. And this summer, name dropping again, I sailed down the Amazon for 3 days. And I can assure you, it looked just like a Surrey wood.
I don't know why you don't
There
use
is
the
an old
actual
saying,
code
you know.
word. I mean, if it's the Amazon, it's London's Thames.
Yes.
It's an old saying that to a blind man a picture gallery is a dull place, and that does occur to me when I hear remarks like that.
Yeah.
The other business about codes is that we once hired a little house from somebody. We went round to dinner one night and saw the photograph of this house on the mantelpiece, and we said, "That looks nice." And the people said, "Yes, well, we hire it out." And we, like fools, fell into it. And the first night, when the rats came up through the floorboards into the bedroom, I took offence and complained. And the lady said, "Oh, you mean the edible dormice?" And I think that's another interesting manifestation of the holiday code.
What we haven't really approached yet is the theory lying behind why it's all right to talk about the disaster stories and all wrong to talk about the sort of blissful ones. Everyone has a high tolerance for the disasters. It isn't because you're a disagreeable fellow. It is because it's a scenario in which instantly you place yourself. You aren't just listening. You're in it. When you hear of the guest house in Ventnor, I make none of these things up, which only had one lavatory, and that was the other side of the kitchen. It was guarded with a dog, by a dog with one eye. Somehow you're there all the time. When you hear a blissful account, when you hear that sort of thing about how wonderful the Seychelles were, you can't really push yourself into it, because you know that if you get the passports right and the hotel right, that is going against your natural inclination to, get things wrong, get things absolutely wrong, not be grown up.
Yes.
Plus the fact that people who go to the Seychelles and say it's awfully nice and so forth, they are also saying there's something cherishable about themselves as well.
But you may only be talking about ourselves. You say this may be an intellectual's or a quasi-intellectual response, because there's a feeling among certain groups of people, perhaps some people, that they should never really be on holiday. There is something paradoxical about the holiday anyway, and that they really, particularly people who are writers, often don't like to regard themselves as ever having such a thing as a holiday. And so that among certain groups of people, I notice this among people that I talk to at the university, they almost are more anxious to tell me what work they have been doing on their holiday, rather than to admit to something as strange, which I should imagine to anybody who works hard in any other enterprise practically, anything so strange as doing nothing at all. That we are the sort of people who have to apologise for doing nothing at all.
But
There is something paradoxical about holiday. There is indeed, and it's putting in a diary months before, my holiday starts today, I am going to be happy. Now that is tempting the fates, and it is paradoxical to plan your own happiness.
But the funny thing about it, it's not just academics who don't have holidays or feel they shouldn't have holidays. I mean, apart from the very poor, the only other class of society who doesn't have holidays are the super rich, the seriously rich. And to you and me, that's rather odd, because as far as we're concerned, they're always on holiday. But, of course, you know, the only reason I know any seriously rich is because we journalists, of course, are fleas in the carpets of mankind.
You have to enter by the back door, as you've often told
absolutely.
me.
But when they're talking about what they're doing, they always talk about it as a chore. For example, they'll say, such a bore. We've got to go to Ventimiglia next week because the boat's having its sea trials. Or, you know, terrible, we can't do this and then because we're going up to Biddick to do a spot of shooting at Tony Lampton's. And you keep thinking, these are holidays.
I can see excellent reasons why both journalists and university teachers are terrified of going on holiday, because that's what most people think they do all the time. And to actually say to somebody, I've had a good holiday, it seems to be rather like saying, I've enjoyed Christmas. You're saying something that's designed to inspire immediate envy. And I've noticed, looking at travel books, that on the whole, the further people like Evelyn Waugh and Graham Greene travel, i.e. the more enviously we look at the fact they've got so far away from England, the more they multiply the jiggers in the foot, the dysentery, and the vomiting, all this sort of thing. Simply, I think, because if they didn't do that, we couldn't read them, because we'd actually burst with envy.
Bad luck is the common property of everyone, which is why it's all right to talk about these disaster stories, whereas felicity only comes by accident. We all feel that. I don't think we admit it as often as we should.
I have another thing to add to what you're saying there, because one of the other things about holidays which is strange is that on holiday you really set out often to avoid meeting other people, in particular to avoid meeting interesting people, because it's perfectly all right to meet the peasant or to meet the person who's lived there for some years, because you can say, oh, what a good local type, and you can handle that. But to meet someone who lives in the next road to you, subscribes to the same magazines, is really rather tedious, because then they are going to start interpreting your holiday for you. Yes. And this is the oddity about a holiday. You don't really know what it's like in the way that you know what other things are like, because there isn't anyone around to ask whether or not you're having a good time.
Nobody's mentioned very much about holidays without going abroad, because there are such things, believe me. And I once worked in a holiday camp, and every Saturday morning the fresh consignment of holidaymakers arrived, pale-faced and happy and full of hope, and every Saturday morning another load used to leave, burnt, broke, miserable, bored, tired, utterly disillusioned. And it was the same every Saturday morning, and it seemed to me that the whole operation...
And that was just the music.
You know, they hadn't even heard the band when they arrived. An utter fraud, the whole thing. And we would go through the same procedure. On Monday night, it was the ladies only, excuse me. Men were not allowed to ask ladies to dance, the ladies would ask the men. And on Tuesday night, everybody had to wear clothes that weren't their own. And on Wednesday night, there was some other madness.
Dreadful.
And it was a grinding process, at the end of which everybody was absolutely sick of the whole thing.
I think it just sounds
but by
like
that time, they'd had all their money.
This was Wandsworth Prison.
Yeah,
It was a very successful holiday camp.
But now you get on to the depressing element in holidays, and it's whimsical for some of us. The most depressing thing I saw, you really will think that I'm paranoid, was hectare after hectare of sunflowers in France, all facing the same way. I don't need you to tell me why they face the same way. I just don't need that. But I can't tell you how, in a traffic jam on a motorway, have you ever experienced one of those? In the fast lane, a traffic jam, 2 miles an hour, and you're looking at all these sunflowers, and I found myself shouting out of the window, it's all right. The rules have been changed. You can look any way you want. Let's have a touch of independence here.
On holiday, when you're having a quarrel with your loved one, it is so... It's almost the essence of quarrel, because when you quarrel at home, it's about serious things like money or bringing up the children or whether your daughter should learn tables and things like that. On holiday, it's reduced to the essence of quarrel, because there's nothing really to quarrel about. And when we were in rather a remote place tucked into the hills behind the coast in southern Spain, I wanted to go to the loo, but I couldn't remember the Spanish for the ladies. So I said to Michael, what's the Spanish for ladies? He said, I don't know, I can't remember. And I said, well, I'll just go and do some sign language. And he got into a frightful rage, and he said, we shouldn't go on holiday anywhere unless we can speak the language. Ridiculous row. Of course, he won because I said, I'm going to do sign language. And I went up to this gnarled old chap who gets photographed by people. And I did a hand-washing gesture to him, meaning, where can I go and wash my hands? That being polite euphemism, I thought. And after a while, the old man said, pulled down his trousers and squatted in the road.
I'm very, very pleased that you've run away from that fictional husband of yours and taken up with a bloke called Michael. Well, that's very interesting. We must talk more about this, but after we've had a bit of a song, Jeremy is setting all this to music, and he calls it Gosh, It Was Fun.
We've just returned from a fabulous spot. Over the seas we fly. All things considered, it cost quite a lot. Sun, sand and clear blue sky. I took a t-shirt and one pair of shorts, enough for a fortnight's stay. She took a dozen bikinis and 2 different dresses for every day. Got to the airport at just before dawn and took off at 2:30. She was on Valium, I was on gin, and so were the pilot and crew. Gosh, it was hot, gosh, it was fun. To leave such a place made us sad. In spite of the couple with typhoid next door, in spite of the earthquake we had. When we arrived at the villa we found, over the seas we fly. None of the toilet facilities worked, they'd cut off the water supply. Nightlife they promised us in the brochure, and a room with a beautiful sight. Workmen worked on the site most of the day, and the disco beneath worked all night. All of the waiters were ripping us off, and the food out there's not up to much. Nobody seemed to speak English at all, just Australian, German and Dutch. But gosh, it was hot and gosh, it was fun, in spite of the wife's diarrhea. Why don't you go there and see for yourselves? We booked up again for next year. First I went pinkish, and then I went red. Over the seas we fry. Then I got sunstroke, and then my skin peeled with mosquito bites right up my thigh. The beach was about half an hour away, which we thought was a bit of a drag. I wrote you a card saying, wish you were here, and the postcard is still in my bag. When we got back it was raining and cold. At least we weren't hijacked mid-air. Then we got home and we found that the house had been burgled, but we didn't care. 'Cause gosh, it was hot, and gosh, it was fun, and in spite of severe stomach ache, now that the blisters have healed, I can say it was worth it. We needed the break.
That was Jeremy. He was singing, Gosh, wasn't it fun? No, let me get the grammar right. Gosh, it was fun. Yes, well, it comes to the same thing. Jolly good stuff. Well, we've got a book here on public speaking, I'm sorry to tell you, which says that when practicing your miserable speech, you should balance telephone directories on your toes, smother your face in egg white, and bounce a tennis ball throughout, presumably on the grounds that if you really are the sort of narcissist who volunteers for this sort of thing, you will endure any humiliation in pursuit of a captive audience, a fish tea, and your train fare. This book perversely attempts to stop decent people being terrified of making speeches in public. What we need is a book to make people more terrified of making speeches in public, so that we don't add to those who aren't at all frightened of it, and will even submit, as actually happened to a friend of mine, to having the chairman pay him his fee in 10-pence pieces, counted out of a biscuit tin, while he was still sitting on the platform. A shaming business, I think we'll all agree.
What do you mean? This book does not encourage you to lose your terror. I'm terrified of public speaking, and I was more frightened at the end of this book by all the appalling things you had to do to actually get through this experience, like the egg white. And also,
the easiest thing is just say no.
It's to say no, which is what I say. But there are all sorts of ways of coping with an audience. All audiences, as far as I can see from this book, are ravening beasts who are determined to kill you by falling asleep or farting or barking or going off to phone their mums and things like that.
Indeed.
And there's a bit in it where it points out that you will have self-defeating negative thoughts, like... The audience isn't responding to me. You are told that what you must do is to have a positive thought. And the positive thought they suggest is to think to yourself, some people have behavioural listening deficits. If I had to think of that, I'd forget the whole speech.
Now, did you think it was a mistake? I didn't even give you the title or the author of this book. I mean, you quoted it.
Painless public speaking.
No, don't bother.
The whole reason for the book, surely, is because of the sort of speech that they recommend that you should give. Where, for example, to make it more interesting, the author says, instead of saying old man, say the weathered, grooved-faced man.
Yes, can anybody say that?
You can if you're a red Indian.
Instead of the taste of lemon,
Weathered,
say
grooved
the
man,
tangy
speak with
tinge of
forked
fresh
tongue.
lemon. Now, if you're going to give that sort of crap to an audience, you're going to need all these ball-bouncing, egg-white skills possible. I just don't know really what to say about this because...
Fine, not.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's the end of that.
That's not, in fact, the end.
Yes. Just stay at home.
Because, you see, I think in some ways it's fairer on speakers to give them some advice how to get through it. But in fact, it's much more entertaining if you're a member of the audience to have somebody who's visibly breaking up in front of your eyes. So my loyalties, both as a speaker and as a listener, are entirely
you do a bit
split.
of it, do you?
Well,
do a little bit.
You can't avoid it if you're actually supposed to give lectures at a university.
No, that isn't the thing. Oh, no, I won't let you slide off. After you've given the lecture, which is a decent, honourable activity because you're instructing the young or even the old, do you mean you slide off in the evenings to lunchtime or lunchtimes and give, little jolly accounts of this, that and the other, nothing whatever to do with your own mystery or discipline?
Well...
yes, I see you do.
It's about time somebody fearlessly came out, and as you know very well, pretending not to look at me, you know very well that I go around sounding my mouth off at the drop of a check in this game which you're talking about. It seems to me that you've got to be a little tiny bit more discriminating. I mean, are you talking about the fact... Are you talking about... There are a list, in fact, at the back of this. It says all the various ways which you must watch out for, things that you must avoid, hasty overgeneralization, unrepresentative examples, inappropriate comparisons and false alternatives. And most of those were contained in your attack upon public speaking.
What a low blow.
Let's try and refine it a little tiny bit more. Are you saying that all examples, all occasions of public speaking are something that you have an objection to?
Yeah, with a single exception. Oh no, with a single exception. If you're selling your own wares, as I once was, a book I'd edited. It's the Everyman Book of Light Verse.
I wasn't going to mention I was there with you on that occasion.
You were cheek by job. I think it's a perfectly honourable thing to get up and sell anything you've done because you're presumably proud and pleased about it, and you should sell it. And that's all right.
Could you just spell out your objections?
Yes,
a little tiny bit more.
That you are only ever invited to do public speaking because you are slightly famous. You are not invited because you're any good at it. You're invited. Allow me. You must accept the answer. You asked the question. That is as much exhibitionism as anything that happens with a man who's wearing a dirty old raincoat at the time. You are simply exposing yourself. You are not there because you can do it. If you weren't known, you wouldn't be invited. That's what's wrong with it.
I've got to pick you up. I've got to come back on that for 1 second, Benny. Just to say that, in fact, if you look at those, as I have, you study those particular brochures which exist of people who will go around and do public speaking, many of the people who receive very high fees for public speaking, who are extremely well known, I could name them, but you wouldn't know, their names would mean nothing to you, are known only for the fact that they are excellent public speakers, not because they are known anywhere else at all.
Can I say, not on behalf of the book, but on behalf of the discussion, that we've underrated this book because in an accidental way, it's a very funny book, and I don't think we've done justice to the humour. The lady who's written the book talks about the problem of attracting the attention of the audience. And it is, of course, a problem that every speaker has.
Just paint your backside green.
No, that would be a modest thing to do, Robert. She says, appear on the stage in a black robe, carrying a shrunken head in a paper bag, which you produce, and then you attract their attention. If this doesn't work, you come on the stage carrying a full-size skeleton. Now, this is wonderful stuff, and I think somebody should try it all out. And the business about the egg yolk is only the thin end of the yolk, as they say. She says, before you make a speech, now what about this? Practice relaxing your throat. Now, how do you do that? And it said, if you have difficulty, yawning helps. Use your eyes to look at people. And be careful not to look as if you're watching a tennis match. I mean, this is beautiful stuff. And if you're puzzled by this and you want further details, she refers you to something called the content of coping replacement statements in the cognitive restructuring component of stress inoculation. This is a book on speech anxiety. It's a wonderful piece of...
What you say, very amusing, but I think it's a touch of a smokescreen, because I don't know whether I'm properly informed or not, but I hear that the other lunchtime it might have been, you, Benny Green, were at a very famous hotel and addressing the Indian mahouts.
I do quite a lot of the public speaking. I don't have to put egg yolk on my face. And I think that I passed the test, the only valid test when it comes to this kind of thing. If you can make an audience laugh all the time, you're excused. And that's the only object that I go out with, is to make them laugh.
But,
and
but there's a real problem here, though, Bob.
I bet there is.
I'll just tell you. I mean, I had a student the other day who had a punk haircut in about 4 different colours. The sort of person who everyone would look at. And I asked her to read out a very short passage of prose to a room of about 10 people. And she began, and after the first sentence, she rushed out of the room in tears because she said she just couldn't bring herself to do it. And I think this is happening in a society where instead of people shouting out if they've got something to sell or praying aloud in church, we're gradually all getting frightened of talking too loud in case the neighbours hear us. But then if you take that point seriously, if you read a book like this, you then become that other person, the mellifluous false face, the person who got 1,000 different epigrams and similes, all these things this book advertises. And then, you have the professional speech maker, the politician with a veneer of total insincerity, which the audience sort of applauds because they've got no choice.
I
agree
with you. In principle,
there must be a way between those two.
There's something in what you've said that makes me not believe what you're saying. I mean, do you do it yourself?
Well, you're being very hard on saying that giving a lecture isn't public speaking. As far as I'm concerned...
That's sensible. That's giving a service.
As far as I'm concerned, the ability to shout out on the Strand, "Taxi!" that, for me, is public speaking. It's raising your voice so other people are looking at you. And that is the thing that most people can't bear to do.
Anne, it's your turn.
No, I mean, I long ago decided somebody once said to me, you must get onto this public speaking game. See, I can't even say...
Public squeaking is okay.
Public squeaking
not
is
enough
exactly
of
what
that.
I
think
do.
we all agree.
You see, that shows. You see, even the thought of it makes me frightened. And I did it for a short while, and it didn't work because I was terrified of audiences. And this book tells you all sorts of things that you must be concerned about audiences. Fair enough. But one of the things it says, for example, if the audience isn't responding, don't think you're to blame. It advises you, consider that perhaps some unusual local happening might have occurred to affect the mood of the audience. And the examples given were such as earthquakes, assassinations, recessions, and the like. And all I can say to that...
It's a wonderful book.
I cannot believe that if I said to the Mothers' Union, I was in the middle of some rip-roaring tale about Nigel Dempster or something, that if they weren't responding, that I could console myself with the thought that the foreign minister of Bolivia had just been shot and it had depressed me.
The only one piece of advice...
frightened. You're quite right. But you see, this book is pivoted on the notion that if you're frightened, you have to be cured of it.
No,
I say no.
Yes.
The person who is frightened, when he's asked to deliver a speech at some social gathering, perhaps a wedding, a christening, that kind of thing, is quite right to be frightened. It proves that he's a member, an uncorrupted member of the human race.
But you're not
you're
saying that,
frightened.
therefore,
speaking.
I know,
still be frightened.
I know why
Public
Anne's
speaking,
frightened.
But you can
as
still...
Mr. Callahan
Silence
used to
for the
say,
gentleman.
public speaking, he used to keep repeating until everyone shut up, and then he'd finish. Public speaking is a terrifying experience because you're up there, everyone else is silent, and you are challenged, as it were, to produce your credentials for being the only one. Now, anyone who's not frightened about that
That's rubbish.
is
That's
not
right.
a member of the
No,
human
I-
race.
Pure rubbish. Typical Callahan. Anne was
just heckling.
Anne was frightened because she didn't follow the instructions in the book, which is to purse your lips into an extreme kiss position and hold for
That
10
could get me into
seconds.
trouble.
and then let go. Now, what the good woman means by let go, I don't know, but you didn't do that, did you?
But that is why, but it's a particular fear, to come back to the fact that anybody who does go around and do public speaking is faced with a particular fear, because you are usually, in these circumstances that we're talking about, the only outsider in the place. And that this is an organisation, a group of people sitting around at tables who will be drinking, they'll have been eating together, they know each other, and you arrive, you have come from the outside, and the idea of breaking into it, the possibility of even making... I was reading like Basil Boothroyd, who writes splendidly about this in a book called Accustomed as I Am, and he describes himself as filling a speaker-shaped space like a fairground cutout on these occasions, and that's exactly it, just moving into that slot and doing it. But I do it partly, because you were talking about motivation, because of that fear, because almost that fear and overcoming that fear and getting by that fear is one of the few frightening things which are...
That's fairly holy. I mean, my reasons for not doing it are as discreditable, I suspect, as your real reasons for doing it. That's to say, I can get more kudos and more money elsewhere, so I don't need to do it. Yes. I'm also frightened, but what I don't like to do, I mean, some people think maybe that I'm being sort of prima donna-ish in getting my living in public in the way we're now all getting our livings at this very second. But really, what we're doing here, we are presumed to have a sort of skill, very humble, but we are presumed to be offering a service, I repeat, however shallow, however slender.
But look, you're all being much too ingenious. It's not a question of
not being accused of that.
If people ask you to come and talk, they presumably want to hear what you've got to say.
It's a part of a ritual. They expect one after a certain dinner.
I don't agree, because you have a title for your talk. If the talk is called Being Charming or Listen to Me, no one will come. It's presumably because people want to learn something.
No.
Secondly, Laurie, there's a very uncharacteristic note of self-pity in what you've just said. But my experience of giving lectures to people whom I don't know has been, the audience has been quite incredibly benign. They've laughed at bad jokes. They've fallen over to applaud a really second or third-rate performances I've given. This idea they're all on the edge of their seat, waiting to sort of cut you down at the first verbal sort of fluff you make is totally untrue.
Can I just explain? It's the thought, it's the possibility that tonight it won't go. It is the feeling that it can't perhaps come off again on this occasion. You know, you're absolutely right. Most of these audiences are benign, but I think that you'll find many people who are out on that circuit, of course they're making money and they're doing it partly for the money, but there are other people who have the sensation, rather like, I mean, when I listen to someone like Tom O'Connor, the comedian, talking about his club outings, those marvellous occasions when he talks about telling jokes and telling stories and nothing happens, then suddenly hearing this from the back of the hall and him saying, well, thank you very much, at last someone to understand. Don't flatter yourself, lad, I'm just trying to get some sauce out of the bottle. You know, that sort of... Now, when you hear those stories, you know that in a way you like to feel, you flatter yourself, you're on somewhat similar circuit.
Well, I think that Auden, you'll all remember that poem, which you'll be glad to hear. I'm not going to read the extensive version of Auden's On the Circuit, which is exactly what we're all talking about. I mean, really, what he was doing and what those of us who do it are doing is sending in cardboard cutouts of themselves, and as he says, spirit is willing to repeat without a qualm the same old talk. And he says, since merit but a dunghill is, I mount the rostrum unafraid. Indeed, 'twere damnable to ask if I were overpaid.
Anne Leslie, Benny Green, Nicholas Tucker and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Jeremy Nicholas provided the musical interlude, and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.